Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Sci-Fi Adventures. We are joined by our special guest storytellers, Mike, Lorrey, and Mr. Kayaker Magic, bringing you the best of the best of the best of sci-fi and live storytelling. Tonight's stories are Delilah and the Space Rigger by Robert Heinlein of the Clan Heinlein, presented by Mr. Mike Lorrey, followed by Terminus by Stanislaw Lem. Boy, from the book Tales of Perks the Pilot, presented by Kayaker Magic. Thanks, guys, and all yours, Mr. Lorrey.
And give him the old heave-ho. Who's his relief? Party named G. Brooks McNye, I told him. A line came sneaking over from the ship. Tiny said, I don't believe she's matched. He buzzed the radio shack for the ship's motion relative to the station. The answer didn't please him, and he told them to call the Half Moon. Tiny waited until the TV screen showed the rocket ship's CO. Good morning, Captain. Why have you placed a line on us? For cargo, naturally. Get your hopheads over here. I want to blast off before we enter the shadow. The station spent about an hour and a quarter each day passing through the Earth's shadow. We worked 2 11-hour shifts and skipped the dark period to avoid rigging lights and heating suits. Tiny shook his head. Not until you've matched course and speed with us. I am matched. Not to specification by my instruments. Have a heart, Tiny. I'm short on maneuvering fuel. If I juggle the entire ship to make a minor correction for a few lousy tons of cargo, I'll be so late I'll have to put down on a secondary field. I may even have to make a dead stick landing. In those days, all ships had landing wings. Look, Captain, I said sharply, the only purpose of your lift was to match orbits for those same few lousy tons. I don't care if you land in Little America on a pogo stick. The first load here was placed with loving care in the proper orbit, and I'm making every other load match. Get that covered wagon into the groove. Very well, Superintendent, Captain Shields said stiffly. Don't be sore, Don, Tiny said softly. By the way, you've got a passenger for me? Oh, yes, so I have. Shields' face broke out into a grin. We'll keep him aboard until we unload. Maybe we can beat the shadow yet. Fine, fine. After all, why should I add to your troubles? The skipper switched off, leaving my boss looking puzzled. We didn't have time to wonder at his words. Shields whipped his ship around in gyros, blasted a second or two. It put her dead in space on us pronto, and used very little fuel despite his belly aching. I grabbed every mail we could spare and managed to get the cargo clear before we swung into the Earth's shadow. Weightlessness is an unbelievable advantage in handling freight. We gutted the Half Moon, by hand, mind you, in 54 minutes. The stuff was oxygen tanks loaded and aluminum mirrors to shield them, panels of outer skin, sandwich stuff of titanium alloy, sheeted with foam glass filling, and cases of JADO units to spin the living quarters of the station. Once it was all out and snapped to our cargo line, I sent the man back with the same line. And I won't let a man work outside without a line, no matter how space happy he figures he is. Then I told Shields to send over the passenger and cast off. This little guy came over the ship's airlock and hooked up on the ship's line, handling himself like he was used to space. He set his feet and dived straight along the stretch line, his snap hook running free. I hurried back and motioned to him to follow me. Tiny, the new man, and I reached the airlock together. Besides the usual cargo lock, we had 3 GE quick locks. The quick lock is an Iron Maiden without spikes. It fits a man in a suit, leaving just a few pints of air to scavenge, and cycles automatically, a big time saver in changing shifts. I passed through the middle-sized one. Tiny, of course, used the big one. Without hesitation, the new man pulled himself into the small one. We went into Tiny's office. Tiny strapped down and pushed his helmet back. Well, McNye, glad to have you with us. The new radio tech opened his helmet. I heard a low, pleasant voice answer, Thank you. I stared and didn't say anything. From where I was, I could see that the radio tech was wearing a hair ribbon. I thought Tiny would explode. He didn't need to say the hair ribbon with the helmet up, and it was clear that the new man was as female as Venus de Milo. Tiny sputtered, and he was unstrapped and diving for the viewport. "Dad," he yelled, "get the Radio Shack, stop that ship." But the half moon was already a ball of fire in the distance. Tiny looked dazed. "Dad," he said, "who else knows about this?" "Nobody, so far as I know." He thought a bit. "We've got to keep her out of sight. That's it. We keep her locked up and out of sight until the next ship matches in." He didn't look at her. "What in the world are you talking about?" McKnight's voice was higher and no longer pleasant. Tiny glared. "You, that's what. What are you, a stowaway?" "Don't be silly. I'm G.B. McKnight, electronics engineer. Don't you have my papers?" Tiny turned to me. "Dad, this is your fault. Pardon me, miss. How did you let them send you a woman? Didn't you even read the advance report on her?" "Me," I said. "Now, see here, you big squarehead. These forms don't show sex. The Fair Employment Commission won't allow it except when it's pertinent to the job." "You're telling me it's not pertinent to the job here?" "Not by job classification, it ain't. There's lots of female radio and radar men back Earthside." "This isn't Earthside." He had something. He was thinking of these two-legged wolves swarming over the job outside. And G.B. McKnight was pretty. Maybe 8 months of no women at all affected my judgment, but she would pass. "I've even heard of female rocket pilots," I said for spite. "I don't care if you've heard of female archangels. I'll have no women here." "Just a minute." If I was roused, she was plain sore. "You're the construction superintendent, are you not?" "Yes," Tiny admitted. "Very well, then. How do you know what sex I am?" "Are you trying to deny that you're a woman?" "Hardly. I'm proud of it. But officially you don't know what sex G. Brooks McNigh is. That's why I use the G instead of Gloria. I don't ask favors." Tiny grunted. "You won't get any. I don't know how you sneaked in, but get this, McKnight, or Gloria, or whatever. You're fired. You go back on the next ship. Meanwhile, we'll try to keep the men from knowing we've got a woman aboard." I could see her count to 10. "May I speak?" she said finally. "Or does your Captain Bligh Act extend to that too?" "Say your say." "I didn't sneak in. I am on the permanent staff of the station, chief communications engineer. I took this vacancy myself to get to know the equipment while it was being installed. I'll live here eventually. I see no reason not to start now." Tiny waved it away. "There'll be men and women both here someday, even kids. Right now, it's a stag, and it'll stay that way." "We'll see. Anyhow, you can't fire me. Radio personnel don't work for you." She had a point. Communicators and some other specialists were lent to the contractors, 5 companies incorporated by Harriman Enterprises. Tiny snorted. "Maybe I can't fire you. I can send you home. Quote, requisition personnel must be satisfactory to the contractor," end quote. Meaning me. Paragraph 7, Clause M. I wrote that clause myself. "Then you know that if requisition personnel are refused without cause, the contractor bears the replacement cost." "I'll risk paying your fare home, but I won't have you here." "You are most unreasonable." "Perhaps, but I'll decide what's good for the job. I'd rather have a dope peddler than having a woman sniffing around my boys." She gasped. Tiny knew he had said too much. He added, "Sorry, miss, but that's it. You'll stay under cover until I can get rid of you." Before she could speak up, I cut in. "Tiny, may I look behind you?" Staring in the port was one of the riggers, his eyes bugged out. 3 or 4 or more floated up and joined him. Then Tiny zoomed up to the port, and they scattered like minnows. He scared them almost out of their suits. I thought he was going to shove his fist through the quartz. He came back looking whipped. "Miss," he said, pointing, "wait in my room." When she was gone, he added, "Dad, what'll we do?" I said, "I thought you had made up your mind, Tiny." "I have," he said peevishly. "Ask the chief inspector to come in, will you?" That showed how far gone he was. The inspection gang belonged to Harriman Enterprise, not to us, then Tiny rated them a mere nuisance. Besides, Tiny was an Oppenheimer grad. Dalrymple was from MIT. He came in, brash and cheerful. "Good morning, Superintendent." "Morning, Mr. Witherspoon. What can I do for you?" Glumly, Tiny told the story. Dalrymple looked smug. "She's right, old man. You can send her back and even specify a male relief, but I can hardly endorse, quote, for proper cause, end quote, now, can I?" "Damnation, Dalrymple, we can't have a woman around here." "A moot point, not covered by contract, you know." "If your office hadn't sent us a crooked gambler as her predecessor, I wouldn't be in this jam." There, remember the old blood pressure. Suppose we have leave the endorsement open and arbitrate the cost. That's fair, eh?" "I suppose so, thanks." "Not at all, but consider this. When you rush Peters off before interviewing the newcomer, you cut yourself down to the one operator. Hammond can't stand watch for 24 hours a day. He can sleep in the shack. The alarm will wake him. I can't accept that. The home office and ship's frequencies must be guarded at all times. Harriman Enterprises has supplied a qualified operator. I'm afraid you must use her for the time being." "Tiny will always operate with the inevitable," he said quietly. "Dad, she'll take the first shift. Better put the married men on that shift." Then he called her in. "Go to the radio shack and start makey learny so that the Hammond can get off watch soon. Mind what he tells you. He's a good man." "I know," she said briskly. "I trained him." Tiny bit his lip. The chief inspector said, "The superintendent doesn't bother with trivia. I'm Robert Dalrymple, chief inspector." He probably didn't introduce his assistant either, Mr. Witherspoon. "Call me Dad," I said. She smiled and said, "Howdy, Dad." I felt warm clear through. She went on to Dalrymple. "Odd that we haven't met before." Tiny butted in. "McNye, you'll sleep in my room." She raised her eyebrows. He went on angrily. "Oh, I'll get my stuff out at once. And get this, keep that door locked off shift." "You darn tootin' I will," Tiny blushed. I was too busy to see much of Miss Gloria. There was cargo to stow, new tanks to install and shield. That left the most worrisome task of all, putting spin on the living quarters. Even the optimists didn't expect much interplanetary traffic for some years. Nevertheless, Harriman Enterprises wanted to get some activities moved in and paying rent against their enormous investment. IT&T had leased space for a microwave relay station, several million a year from television alone. The Weather Bureau was itching to set up its hemispheric integration station. Palomar Observatory had a concession. Harriman had donated that space. The Security Council had some hush-hush project. Fermi Physical Labs and Kettering Institute each had space a dozen tenants wanted to move in now, or sooner, even if we never completed accommodations for tourists and travelers. There were time bonuses in it for 5 companies incorporated and their help, so we were in a hurry to get spin on the quarters. People who have never been out have trouble getting through their heads, at least I had, that there was no feeling of weight, no up and down in a free orbit in space. There's Earth, round and beautiful, only 20-odd thousand miles away, close enough to brush your sleeve. You know it's pulling you towards it, yet you feel no weight at all, absolutely none. You float. Floating is fine for some types of work, but when it's time to eat or play cards or bathe, it's good to feel weight on your feet. Your dinner stays quiet, and you feel more natural. You see in pictures of the station a huge cylinder, like a bass drum, with ship's nose pockets dimpling its sides. Imagine a snare drum spinning around inside the bass drum. That's the living quarters, with centrifugal force pinch hitting for gravity. We could have spun the whole station, but you can't berth a ship against a whirling dervish. So we built a spinning part for creature comfort and an outer stationary part for docking, tanks, storerooms, and the like. You pass from one to the other at the hub. When Miss Gloria joined us, the inner part was closed in and pressurized, but the rest was a skeleton of girders. Mighty pretty, though, a great network of shiny struts and ties against the black sky and stars. Titanium alloy, 1403, light, strong, non-corrodable. The station is flimsy compared with the ship, since it doesn't have to take a blast-off stresses. That meant we didn't dare put a spin on by violent means, which is where the JATO units come in. JATO stands for Jet Assisted Takeoff, rocket units invented to give airplanes a boost. Now we use them wherever a controlled push is needed, say to get a truck out of the mud on a dam job. We mounted 4,000 of them around the frame of the living quarters, each one placed just right. They were wired up and ready to fire when Tiny came to me looking worried. "Dad," he said, "let's drop everything and finish compartment D113. "Okay," I said. D113 was in the non-spin part. Rig an airlock and stock it with 2 weeks' supplies. That'll change your mass distribution for spin, I suggested. I'll refigure it the next dark period, then we'll shift JATOs. When Dalrymple heard about that, he came charging around. It meant a delay in making rental space available. "What's the idea?" Tiny stared at him. They'd been cooler than ordinary lately. Dalrymple had been finding excuses to seek out Miss Gloria. He had to pass through Tiny's office to reach her temporary room, and Tiny finally had told him to get out and stay out. "The idea," Tiny said slowly, "is to have a pup tent in case the house burns." "What do you mean?" "Suppose we fire up the JATOs and the structure cracks. Want to hang around in a spacesuit until the ship happens by?" "That's silly. The stresses have been calculated." "That's what the man said when the bridge fell. We'll do it my way." Dalrymple stormed off. Tiny's efforts to keep Gloria fenced up were sort of pitiful. In the first place, the radio techs shift transfers and dock to a few for costs. The radio tech's biggest job was repairing stuff, walkie-talkies done on a watch. A rash of such troubles broke out on her shift. I made some shift transfers and docked a few for cost, too. It's not proper maintenance when a man deliberately busts his aerial. That's what they used to call a radio. There were other symptoms. It became stylish to shave, then started wearing shirts around quarters, and bathing increased to where I thought I would have to rig another water still. Came the shift when D113 was ready and the JATOs readjusted. I don't mind saying I was nervous. All hands were ordered out of the quarters and into suits. They perched around the girders and waited. Men in spacesuits all look alike. We used the numbers and colored armbands. Supervisors had 2 antennas, one for a gang frequency, one for the supervisor circuit. With Tiny and me, the second antenna hooked back through the radio shack into the all-gang frequencies of broadcast. The supervisors had reported their men clear of the fireworks, and I was about to give Tiny the word when this figure came climbing through the girders inside the danger zone. No safety line, no armband, 1 antenna. Miss Gloria, of course. Tiny hauled her out of the blast zone and anchored her to his own safety line. I heard his voice, harsh in my helmet. "Who do you think you are, a sidewalk superintendent?" And her voice. "What do you expect me to do? Go park on a star." "I told you to stay away from the job. If you can't obey orders, I'll lock you up." I reached him, switched off my radio, and touched helmets. Boss, you're broadcasting." "Oh," he says, switches off and touches his helmets with her. We could still hear her. She didn't switch off. "Why, you big baboon, I came outside because you sent a search party to clear everybody out." "And how would I know about a safety line rule? You've kept me penned up." And finally, "We'll see." And he told the boss's electrician to go ahead. Then we forgot the row. We were looking for the prettiest fireworks we've ever seen, a giant St. Catherine's wheel, rockets blasting all over, utterly soundless out there in space, but beautiful beyond compare. The blast died away, and there was the living quarters, spinning true as a flywheel. Connie and I both let out sighs of relief. We all went back inside then to see what weight tasted like. It tasted funny. I went through the shaft and started down the ladders, feeling myself gain weight as I neared the rim. I felt seasick, like the first time I experienced no weight. I could hardly walk, and my calves were cramped. We inspected throughout, then went to the office and sat down. It felt good, just right for comfort, 1/3 gravity at the rim. Tiny rubbed his chair arms and grinned. Beats being penned up in D113. Speaking of being penned up, Miss Gloria said, walking in, I may have a word with you, Mr. Larson. Why, certainly. Matter of fact, I wanted to see you. I owe you an apology, Miss McNye. Forget it, she cut in. You are on edge, but I want you to know this. How long are you going to keep up this nonsense of trying to chaperone me? He studied her. Not long, just till your relief arrives. So, who is the shop steward around here? A ship fitter named McAndrews, but you can't use him. He's a staff member. Not in the job I'm filling. I'm going to talk to him. You're discriminating against me, and am I off time at that? Perhaps, but but I have the authority. Legally, I'm a ship's captain while on this job. A captain in space has wide discriminatory powers. Then you should use them with discrimination, she says. He grinned. Isn't that what you just said I was doing? We didn't hear from the shop steward, but Miss Gloria started doing as she pleased. She showed up at the movies, next off ship with Dalrymple. Tiny left in the middle of the good show, too. Lissy Strata goes to town, relayed up from New York. As she was coming back alone, he stopped her, having seen to it that I was present. Miss McNye, yes? I think you should know, Chief Inspector Dalrymple is a married man. Are you suggesting that my conduct has been improper? No, but then mind your own business. Before he could answer, she added, It might interest you that he told me about your 4 children. Tiny sputtered, Why I'm not even married. So that makes it worse, doesn't it? She swept out. Tiny quit trying to keep her in her room, but told her to notify him whenever she left it. It kept him busy riding herd on her. I refrained from suggesting he get Dalrymple to spell him. But I was surprised when he told me to put through the order dismissing her. I had been pretty sure he was going to drop it. What's the charge, I asked. Insubordination? I kept mum. He said, Well, she won't take orders. She does her work okay. You give her orders you wouldn't give to one of the men, and that a man wouldn't take. You disagree with my orders? Yeah, that's not the point. You can't prove the charge, Tiny. Well, charge her with being female. I can prove that. I didn't say anything. Dad, he said wheedlingly, you know how to write it. No personal animus against Miss McNye, but it is felt that it is a matter of policy, and so forth and so on. I wrote it and gave it to Hammond privately. Radio techs are sworn to secrecy, but it didn't surprise me when I was stopped by O'Connor, one of our best metalsmiths. Look, Dad, is it true that the old man's getting rid of Brooksy? Brooksy? Brooksy McNye. Says to call her Brooks. Is it true? I admitted it, then went on, wondering if I should have lied. It takes 4 hours about for a ship to lift from Earth. The shift before the Pole Star was due, with Miss Gloria's relief, the timekeeper brought me 2 separation slips. 2 men were nothing. We averaged more each ship. An hour later, he reached me by supervisor circuit and asked me to come by the time office. I was out in the rim inspecting a weld job. I said, No, please, Mr. Witherspoon, he begged. You've got to. When one of the boys doesn't call me Dad, it means something. I went. There was a queue like mail call outside his door. I went in and shut the door on them. He handed me a double handful of separation slips. What in the great depths of night is this? I asked. There's dozens more I ain't had time to write up yet. None of the slips had any reason for giving, just own choice. Look, Jimmy, what goes on here? Can't you dope it out, Dad? Shucks, I'm turning in one too. I told him my guess, and he admitted it. So I took the slips, called Tiny, and told him for the love of heaven to come to his office. Tiny chewed his lip considerable. But, Dad, they can't strike. It's a non-strike contract with bonds from every union concerned. It's no strike, Tiny. You can't stop a man from quitting. They'll pay their own fares back, so help me. Guess again, most of them have worked long enough for the free ride. We'll have to hire others quick, or we'll miss our date. Worse than that, Tiny, we won't finish. By next dark period, you won't even have a maintenance crew. I've never had a gang of men quit me. I'll talk to them. No good, Tiny. You're up against something too strong for you. You're against me, Dad? I'm never against you, Tiny. He said, Dad, you think I'm pig-headed, but I'm right. You can't have one woman among several hundred men. It drives him nutty. I didn't say it affected him the same way, I said. Is that bad? Of course, I can't let the job be ruined to humor one woman. Tiny, have you looked at the progress charts lately? I've hardly had time to. What about them? I knew why he hadn't had time. You'll have trouble proving Miss Gloria interfered with the job. We're ahead of schedule. We are? While he was studying the charts, I put an arm around his shoulder. Look, son, I said. Sex has been around on our planet for a long time, Earthside. They never get away from it. Yet some pretty big jobs get built anyhow. People will just have to learn to live with it here, too. Maybe, matter of fact, you had the answer a minute ago. I did? I sure don't know it. You said you can't have one woman among several hundred men. Get me? No, I don't. Wait a minute. Maybe I do. Ever tried jiu-jitsu? Sometimes you get win by relaxing. Yes, yes. When you can't beat 'em, you gene 'em. He buzzed the Radio Shack. Have Hammond relieve you, McKnight, and come to my office. He did it handsomely, stood up and made a speech. He'd been wrong. Taken him a long time to see it. Hoped there were no hard feelings. He was instructing the home office to see how many jobs could be filled at once with female help. Don't forget married couples, I put in mildly, and better ask for some older women, too. I'll do that, Tiny agreed. Have I missed anything, Dad? Guess not. We'll have to rig quarters, but there's time. Okay, I'm telling them to hold the Pole Star, Gloria, so they can send us a few this trip. That's fine. She was looking very happy. He chewed his lip. I have a feeling I've missed something. I got it. Dad, tell them to send up a chaplain for the station as soon as possible. Under the new policy, we may need one any time. I thought so, too. The end. So, it's an interesting story from our point in time, as it was regarded very feminist back then. But to our modern sensibilities, I'm sure there's plenty of women who would find it rather chauvinistic.
Well played, though.
Now we got Kayaker with his work from Stanislaw Lem.
Sorry for...
Yeah, can everybody hear me now?
Yep.
We should have...
I read a Stanislaw Lem story 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, and they were both very funny stories. And lest people think that Stanislaw Lem only writes comedy, I'm reading a more serious story this week. The story is called Terminus, and it's from a collection of short stories by Stanislaw Lem called Tales of Pricks the Pilot. And Terminus is actually a novella. It's quite long, and I don't have time to read it all, but I'm going to read my favorite section of the book, and I'll give you a little introduction. That it's all the rest of the stories in the book are about this one character, Pricks the Pilot. And he, Pricks, has a long career in the Space Marines, and this story takes place late in his career, and I think he gets drummed out of the Marines for something, and he takes a job in the Merchant Marine, piloting a ship from from Earth to Mars. And this is his first day on the job, and he's kind of melancholy. And so this isn't a funny story at all. It's a melancholy story of a guy who's taking a job he isn't sure he's going to like, and Lem in this particular story, he has some really incredible prose, and so instead of humor, there's a lot of dense writing in here, and I hope you'll get a flavor for that. So he's already met the crew, and the ship has taken off, and they're on the way to Mars, and I believe they're coasting, so he's running around the ship in zero gravity. And now I'll start reading in the middle of the story. The string of lights burned with a serene calm, inundating the decks with a watery blue shimmer. He swam up to a rope dangling from the ceiling. The moment he let go the end, it coiled itself up lazily, snake-like, as if suddenly animated by his touch. His head snapped back. A clunking noise, similar to a hammering on metal, sounded nearby. He swam in the direction of the echoes, their volume now rising, now falling. Along the way, he spotted a set of rusty tracks embedded in the deck. Once used for wheeling dollies to and from the holds, he guessed. And soon was sailing along so fast he could feel the air buffeting his face. The clanging kept getting louder. He sighted a pipe angling around the corner from the next passageway and running along the ceiling. A section of old 1-inch pipeline. He touched it with his hand. It jiggled. The resonances now came in clusters of 2s and 3s. That's when it hit him. The banging was in Morse. A-T-T-E-N-T-I-O-N. The series came again. I'll try reading them out loud. You'll have to imagine that these are coming as banging and clangings. Attention. And again. Attention. Then the pipe chimed. Am behind bulkhead. By force of habit, he spliced the letters together, syllable by syllable. Ice everywhere. Ice, he wondered, caught completely off guard. What in ice? What ice? Reactor vessel cracked. The pipe resonated. He wrapped his hand around it. Who was signing, and where was it coming from? He tried to figure out which way the pipe ran. From the bow or back aft. It looked like one of those emergency pipelines, obsolete, with branches on every deck. Maybe someone was practicing his Morse? That's crazy. The pilot up in the control room, maybe? Come in, Pratt. Come in, men. A pause. Prix was breathless. The mention of that name was like a blow to the gut. This ship had once been involved in a famous wreck. It was hit by meteorites and lost for several years, and the crew died on board. And Pratt is the name of one of the men who used to be a crew member on the ship when it crashed. Second, he stared wide-eyed at the pipe, then suddenly lurched forward. That's it. The name of that second pilot, he thought as he hit the bend, bounced off, and made for the control room, gathering speed as he went, the pipe all the while reverberating overhead. Wayne here, where's Simon? The echoes receded. Prix momentarily lost sight of the pipe, picked it up again when it swerved into the next passageway, lunged after it, was bounced off the wall by his own momentum, and saw something through the dust cloud, a gnarled stump of metal, fixed with a rusty cap, a pipe bend, severed. So it came from the tail section, not the cockpit, huh? There was nobody back aft. Pratt in sixth to last hold, the pipe chimed. He hung like a bat under the ceiling, clutching the pipe with his fingers, and felt the reverberations in his head. The banging resumed after a short intermission. His bottled O2 30 minus. Another series of 3. Come in, Momsen. A pause. He looked around. Dead silence except for a faint whirring noise in one of the fan outlets. The incoming fresh air sent particles of dirt swirling up to the ceiling, where under the light they took on the aspect of misshapen moths. Then came a torrent of clanging, rapid and staccato-like. Pratt, Pratt, Pratt. Mosen doesn't answer. Oxygen number 77, can you transfer over? A pause. The lighting remained constant. The dust and waste particles continued their pirouette in slow motion. Prix felt like letting go of the pipe, but something prevented him. He waited. Then it started again. Simon to Momsen. Pratt's in number 6 behind bulkhead to last. Bottle, Momsen. Come in, Momsen. Momsen. This last sequence, hard and intense, the pipe went on vibrating long after it was over. A pause, a dozen or so unintelligible taps, followed by a brisk series. Reception weak, reception weak. Silence. Come in, Pratt. Come in, Pratt. Over. Silence. The pipe barely palpated. The next series came at faint intervals, as though from far off. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. SOS. There was a gradual tapering off. 2 more dashes, 1. Then a long, drawn-out screeching noise, similar to a scraping or scratching against metal, amplified only by the aura of total silence. He thrust himself away and swam headfirst along the pipe, veering where it veered, now climbing, now dipping, while the parting air brushed his face. An open shaft, a ramp, narrowing walls, the cargo holds, number 1, number 2, number 3. He could barely see, it was so dark. He ran his fingertips along the pipe in order not to lose it, the brittle dust coating his hands charcoal black, and found himself in another part of the ship, one not enclosed by any decks or ceilings. In the holds. The bloated carcasses of the reserve tanks loomed up darkly between the cross frames, with only an occasional dust-specked light beam knifing through the darkness. At one point, he looked up and spotted a double row of lights in a black shaft, the bulbs encrusted with the same reddish-brown dust that kept trailing him like a cloud, like smoke from an undetected fire. The air was stuffy, stale, permeated with the smell of treated metal. He was sailing among the vaguely enumerated shadows of the trusses when the clanking reverberations started up again. Come in, Pratt, come in. The pipe suddenly forked. He wrapped one hand around each of the forking branches, but he failed to tell from which direction the sound was being transmitted. He gambled on the left. A hatch tunnel, pitch dark, constricting to a bright disk at the other end, brought him out into a well-lighted room, the entrance to the reaction chamber. Wayne here, Pratt doesn't answer, the pipe went on. It went on resonating while he unbolted the door. A blast of hot air hit him flush in the face. He climbed up to the catwalk. The compressors were humming away. A warm wind ruffled his hair. From the catwalk he saw, in foreshortened perspective, the reactor's concrete wall, the luminous gauges, the warning lights shimmering like red drops. Simon to Wayne here. Momsen below me, the pipe reverberated, hammer-like, only a short distance away. At the point where it looped down out of the wall to join up with the main pipe inlet, standing with legs astride in front of the reactor shielding, was Terminus, the robot. He's the one the story is named after. With quick jab-like movements, as if in some imaginary sparring match, he was applying cement filler by the fistful, slapping it around, smoothing it, molding it, before moving on to the next section. I'm just noticed that he's referring to the robot as he, and after the last story, I was sensitized to notice that. The robot was molding it before moving on to the next section. Prix concentrated his ear on the rhythm of his movements, on the cadence produced by his piston-like arms. Mommsen cut off, Pratt losing oxygen. Terminus stopped with both arms uplifted and poised opposite his deceptively human shadow. First to the left and then to the right, he pivoted his box-shaped head in search of the next scene. He bent down, scooped up the sealant with his trowel-like claws, and again the driving rhythm of his arms pulsated through the pipe. Doesn't answer, doesn't answer. Prix side-vaulted over the railing and floated down. Terminus, he yelled before his feet had even touched down. I hear and obey, came the robot's instantaneous reply. One eye, the left, remained fixed on the man while the other rotated in its orbit, oblivious of the hands, which went on plastering to a steady beat. Come in, Pratt, come in over. Terminus, what are you doing? Hollered Prix. Reactor leak, 0.4 of Rogen per hour. Repair leak, the robot replied in a hollow bass while his hands kept drumming away. Wayne here, come in, Mommsen, come in. Terminus, Prix yelled a third time, now glancing up at the metal face staring cross-eyed at him, now down at the blinding fury of metal claws. I hear and obey, answered the robot in the same sing-song lilt. What are you signaling in Morse? Repair leak, the deep voice intoned. Simon, Wayne, Potter, Pratt down to 0, Mommsen, answer. The tube reverberated in response to the pelting, swishing jabs of steel. When the viscous paste began to run, the metal claws were immediately there to scrape it back up, pack it, and mold it to the cylindrical surface. For an instant, the upraised arms remained poised in midair. Then the robot bent down, scooped up another batch of cement, and let loose with a barrage of lightning-quick jabs. Mommsen, 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 come in, Mommsen, come in, Mommsen. The cadence reached a frenzied pitch. The piping shook and wailed from the unrelenting shower of blows, at times verging on a prolonged human cry. Terminus, stop it! He made a jab for the robot's oily wrists, but they slipped out of his grasp. Terminus suddenly went stiff. Not a sound was heard except for the whining, whimpering pumps behind the concrete containment wall. Before him loomed a metal hulk, bathed in the oil that oozed down its stilt-like legs. He stepped back. Terminus, he said, his voice lowering to a whisper. What are you? He broke off at the sound of metal grinding against metal. The robot was rubbing his claws together, trying to peel away the leftover scabs of dry cement. Instead of dropping to the floor, the flakes spiraled up and scattered like wisps of smoke. What have you been up to? Asked Prix. Repair leak, 0.4 of Rogen per hour. May I proceed? What were you signaling in Morse? In Morse, the robot repeated after him, mimicking his exact tone, and then added, Not understand. May I proceed? You may, muttered Prix, watching as the powerful arm straightened. Yes, you may. Prix waited. Terminus, seemingly unmindful of him now, ladled up some cement with his left hand, slung it against the shielding, and in 3 brisk strokes packed it, flattened it, and smoothed it. Then the right hand came up, and the pipe responded with a rat-a-tat-tat. Pratt, trapped in 6th. Mommsen, come in, Mommsen. Where is Pratt? Prix burst out in a shrill voice. Terminus, his arms converted by the light into luminous bolts, replied at once, Don't know, at the same time thumping away with such speed that Prix had trouble deciphering the Morse. Pratt doesn't answer. Then an amazing thing occurred. The first series, produced by the right hand, was joined by a second set, much weaker in intensity, this one coming from the fingers of the left hand. The signals overlapped, and for a while the pipe reverberated with the percussions of a double hammering, incomprehensible except for one gradually dissolving sequence. Frigid hands impossible to Terminus, Prix said, with his lips only, slowly retreating in the direction of the metal staircase. The robot was too distracted to pay him any heed. His torso, glistening with oil, went on rocking to the rhythm of his work. Prix didn't need to listen to the pounding signals anymore. He could read them in the back and forth movement of his arms, in the play of light on the metal plating. Come in, Momsen. So our pilot, Prix, kind of hides away from the robot for a while. He does develop the hypothesis that the robot was there in the crash and was trapped in the wreckage, and its positronic brain was damaged by not being able to help the dying humans. Because, as you know, the 3 laws of robotics say you can't allow a human to come to harm. Well, the robot had no choice, but apparently listening to humans tap it out in Morse code as they died damaged its positronic brain. And everyone else thinks it just has a palsy, but he's heard the Morse code now, and he's hypothesizing it's remembering what everybody said as they died. It's the robot for most of the rest of the flight, but on the very last day of the flight, late in the evening, when in the darkness they dimmed the lights to blue at night, which I thought was interesting that now in our modern enlightened times, blue is a bad color for people to sleep in. Only intermittently relieved by the blue-tinted night lights seemed to swell the decks, he suddenly remembered that he had neglected to inspect the cargo holds. He exited from the mess hall, leaving Sims and Bowman to finish their nightly game of chess, and rode the elevator down below. Since their last encounter, he had neither seen nor heard Terminus. Only one thing served as a reminder. The cat. Oh, there was also a ship's cat that the robot was out looking for earlier in the story. It had disappeared without leaving a trace, as if it had never been aboard in the first place. At midships, the barely lighted passageway sighed with the continual flow of air. He opened the hatch to the first hold, and the dust-colored lamps filled the interior with a sullied glow. He covered the area, sailing from one end of the hold to the other. A narrow passage divided the crates, some of which were stacked as high as the ceiling. He checked the tension of the steel straps, securing the pyramids of cargo to the deck. A draft created by the open hatch started sucking debris out of the dark corners, the sawdust and oakum rocking gently up and down like duckweed on a water swell. He was already back out in the passageway when he heard a succession of sounds, slow and cadenced. Attention. 3 taps. Prix drifted on an air current, which lifted him imperceptibly higher. Willing or not, he had to listen. It was a 2-way transmission he heard now. The signals were weak, restrained, as if the object was to conserve strength. The rhythm varied, now slow, now fast. One of the parties kept making mistakes, as if rusty with the Morse alphabet. At times there would be a prolonged pause. At other times the signals would overlap. The dark, sparsely lit passageway seemed interminable, as if the fanning breeze had its origin in the cosmic void. Simon, do you hear him? Negative. Pause. Negative. Prix recoiled off the wall, tucked in his legs, and torpedoed his way back aft, each passageway a little darker than the one before. The gradual accumulation of powdery red dust around the lamps, a sign that he was nearing the stern. The door to the reactor chamber was open. He peeked inside. He was struck by its coolness. The compressors, already shut down for the night, were quiet. The piping murmured inside the concrete wall now and then, emitted a strange, almost gurgling sound, gas bubbles impeding the flow of congealing liquid. Terminus, cement spattered from the top down, was diligently at work. A fan whirred frantically just above his head, which kept shifting back and forth with a pendulum-like regularity. Holding onto the railing with one hand, Prix glided down the stairs without touching the steps. The robot's iron appendages barely echoed, their impact being cushioned by a freshly applied coat of cement. Negative. Over. Whether by accident or by command of the same source dictating the transmission in Morse, the fact was that the resonances were abating. Prick stood an arm's length away from the robot, close enough to see the overlapping segments of its belly, which, every time it doubled up, evoked the image of an insect's crenellated pouch. The lights, reflecting in miniature, swung back and forth in his glass eyes. Their impersonal stare impressed on Pricks the fact that he was alone in the empty chamber with its sheer concrete walls. Terminus was a machine, an insensate machine, capable of transmitting a pre-recorded set of sounds, that and nothing more. Come in, Simon. He barely managed to decipher it. So faint and erratic were the signals that came now. Above the slaving robot's head was a half-meter section of pipe. Pricks reached up and grabbed it. As he was adjusting his grip, his knuckles accidentally brushed the metal tubing. Terminus froze momentarily. The tapping broke off in the middle of a series. Seized by a sudden impulse, before he had time to reflect on the folly of his action, on this insane urge to intrude on a conversation from out of the deep past, Pricks rapped out the following quick message. Why doesn't Momsen answer? At almost the exact instant his knuckles touched the pipe, Terminus responded with a rapping of his own. Two series ran parallel for a while, when suddenly, as if in recognition of his question, the robot's hand stopped, remained poised until Pricks was finished hammering, and a few seconds later began packing cement into the fissures. Because his right... A pause. Terminus bent over to scoop up another batch of paste. What did he mean by that? Was it the beginning of an answer? Pricks waited with bated breath. The robot straightened again and began pelting the shielding with cement, but so hard and so fast that the reverberating blows seemed to flow into a single, drawn-out drone. Is that you, Simon? Yourself. Who was signaling? 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 Come in. It's actually a little bit more, and you learn the final disposition of Terminus, but that's an interesting way to end the story, I think. And for today.
And that's like a cliffhanger. Is that legal?
Well, the point is like a ghost story. It's what if the ghosts answer you when you tap on the pipe? That's a chilling way to end the story.
Fabulous. Yeah, you say we're gonna find something besides Stanislaus Lem, but man, he's good stuff. And of course, REH is always great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, folks, for coming in.